It was supposed to be just another quiet day in Los Angeles. But what the police found under Keanu Reeves's villa would turn their world upside down. A routine check quickly escalated into something far more sinister when a hidden passageway was discovered beneath the sprawling estate. The first sign of trouble came when a few floorboards in the villa's cellar gave way, revealing an opening that had been sealed off for decades. Curiosity got the better of the officers, and as they descended deeper into the shadows, they realized they had uncovered something that could change everything they knew about the man himself. But what they found there? No one could have ever predicted. The question echoed in their minds. What could possibly be hidden underneath one of Hollywood's most beloved stars' homes? A sense of dread filled the air, and whispers of danger began to spread through the station. For years, Keanu Reeves had kept a low profile, rarely speaking about his personal life, yet no one could have imagined what lay beneath his feet or why it was there. The deeper the investigation went, the more it became clear. This was no ordinary discovery. What would you do if you found something buried in your own home, something you never could have imagined? The truth was out there, but it was far darker than anyone had anticipated. Stay tuned because things are about to get much more intense. But first, hit that subscribe button so we can keep bringing you the most thrilling stories like this one. You don't want to miss what happens next. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Keanu Reeves. The name alone invokes images of one of Hollywood's most beloved and enigmatic stars. Known for his roles in iconic films like The Matrix and John Wick, Keanu's persona on screen is that of a calm, cool and composed hero. Off-screen, however, Keanu was just as elusive, a man who fiercely protected his privacy and kept his personal life away from the prying eyes of the public. Born in Beirut and raised across multiple countries, Keanu's early life was far from ordinary. His mother was a performer, and his father, who left when he was just a young boy, had a mysterious and unpredictable presence in Keanu's life. These early years, marked by instability and a sense of displacement, shaped the quiet man the world would come to know. While his acting career soared, Keanu's personal life remained under the radar. He didn't indulge in the Hollywood party scene like many of his peers. Instead, he surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of friends, many of whom were longtime confidants. Those closest to him knew that beneath his stoic exterior, Keanu carried with him an incredible depth of emotion, a vulnerability that few ever saw. Keanu's relationships with his family were complicated, especially with his father, whose sporadic appearances and abandonment left a scar that would remain with him for years. The legacy of this fractured bond haunted him throughout his life, and the public was completely unaware of the depths of his struggles. The villa in question, the one where the secret tunnel had been found, was more than just a place to live for Keanu. It was a sanctuary, a place to retreat from the world and its endless demands. It was here, behind the high walls and sprawling grounds, that Keanu sought solace and peace. But what many didn't know was that this villa also held something far more sinister, a relic from Keanu's past that he had spent years trying to forget. The discovery of the tunnel under his home wasn't just an accident. It was a reminder of a chapter of his life he'd buried long ago. It was a chapter tied to his father's mysterious ties to underground networks, something Keanu had never wanted to confront, let alone share with the world. But now it seemed that the secrets he had locked away were about to resurface, and the world was about to learn something about Keanu Reeves that no one had ever suspected. What dark history was hidden beneath the surface of Keanu's calm exterior? Could this discovery mean that the actor, the man who seemed to have it all together, was hiding far more than anyone ever imagined? The truth, it seemed, was buried under the floors of that villa, and no one, least of all Keanu himself, was ready for what would be uncovered next. The moment the police unearthed the tunnel, everything changed. What had started as a simple investigation into a property was quickly spiraling into something far more intense and confusing. As the officers delved deeper into the dark, winding corridor beneath Keanu Reeves's villa, a creeping sense of unease began to set in. No one could quite put their finger on it, but something about this discovery didn't sit right. It felt like they were stepping into something that had been hidden for a very long time, and they weren't sure they were ready for the consequences. The deeper they explored the underground network, the more questions piled up. Why would Keanu, a man with no known criminal connections, have a secret tunnel beneath his home? And why had he never mentioned it? More importantly, why was it so meticulously concealed, as if it were meant to stay hidden from the world forever? Rumors started circulating at the police station. Officers who had once seen Keanu as just another celebrity were now questioning everything they thought they knew about him. It wasn't just the tunnel, it was the items they found inside. Old documents, strange symbols, and pieces of technology that seemed out of place for someone like Keanu. It was as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep this under wraps. Tension grew between the officers who wanted to continue digging and those who felt they were crossing a line. Some thought they were getting too close to a conspiracy they weren't prepared to unravel. Others felt compelled to push forward, believing that the truth about the tunnel and its connection to Keanu was too important to ignore. Then came the whispers of a connection to something much bigger, a shadowy figure from Keanu's past. Someone who had ties to dangerous underground organizations. Someone who had once been part of Keanu's life, but had since disappeared from the public eye. Was this a family affair, a remnant of his troubled childhood? Or was there a much darker, more sinister story unfolding beneath the surface? The officers debated whether they should notify Keanu about what they had found. Some argued that they were just doing their job. Others feared confronting the actor directly might set off a chain of events they couldn't control. Meanwhile, the tension in the investigation was palpable. The last thing they wanted was to get too close to something that could jeopardize their careers, or worse, their lives. Still, they couldn't ignore the mounting evidence. As they followed the tunnel deeper into the labyrinth, one officer stumbled upon a hidden room, locked away for years. The walls were lined with old photographs, faded and yellowed with time, depicting Keanu with unfamiliar people. There was one image in particular that caught their attention. Keanu, standing next to a man who looked eerily familiar. The man was older, with a cold, calculating expression, and his presence made the room feel even more suffocating. Was this the figure behind the tunnel? Despite the growing sense of dread, the team pressed on. But with each new discovery, the truth became harder to ignore. Keanu Reeves, the man who had always seemed so untouchable, was hiding something dark and deep. And the more the officers uncovered, the more they realized just how far down this rabbit hole went. Would Keanu ever come clean about his past? Would the truth behind the tunnel be revealed? And most importantly, what were the consequences for everyone involved if they pushed too far? As the investigation progressed, the officers found themselves at a crossroads. The tunnel stretched further than they had ever anticipated, winding beneath the estate like a forgotten artery of some long-dead machine. Each step they took seemed to echo into the darkness, and yet the deeper they ventured, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary hiding place. It was a carefully designed network, one that had been meticulously built for a reason: the Bay. Atmosphere was thick with tension. The air was damp and musty, the walls of the tunnel crumbling in places, but the officers pressed on, compelled by the sense that they were closing in on something monumental. They were now in uncharted territory, and with each new room they uncovered, they found themselves asking more questions than they could answer. At first, it was just a few items: old maps, strange symbols carved into the walls, and notes in languages none of them could decipher. But as they descended into the heart of the labyrinth, the officers stumbled upon something far more unsettling: a massive, hidden chamber. It was as though the room had been waiting for them, its secrets dormant for decades. Inside, the officers found stacks of boxes sealed shut and covered in dust. The moment they pried open one of them, a heavy sense of dread descended upon them. What they found inside were old, weathered documents, more than just papers. These were blueprints, plans, for something far bigger than Keanu Reeves. One document stood out among the rest, a map of sorts, detailing underground routes and secret meeting places, with markings that indicated a series of locations spread across the globe. The officers exchanged confused glances. These weren't the kind of plans that someone would hide in a celebrity's basement. They were linked to covert operations, shadowy dealings, and an intricate web of secrecy that, until now, had never been connected to Keanu. As they flipped through the papers, their hands shaking with both fear and anticipation, one document seemed to jump out at them, a ledger detailing payments and exchanges, along with a list of names, many of which were crossed out. But one name stood clear: Thomas Reeves, Keanu's father. The connection hit like a thunderclap. Keanu's father, a man who had always been a mysterious figure in the actor's life, had ties to something much darker than anyone had ever suspected. These weren't just old family secrets. This was something far more dangerous, something tied to global organizations that had no intention of being exposed. It wasn't just Keanu's father who had been involved. There were names of other people, powerful individuals in the world, of organized crime, intelligence agencies, and other clandestine networks. It became clear that Keanu was not just hiding from his past. He was actively involved in something far larger, something that had been kept in the shadows out of the public eye. The officers began to question everything they knew about the actor. Was Keanu a victim of his circumstances, or was he a willing participant in these dark dealings? And if Keanu himself was in danger, what did that mean for everyone around him? With no answers yet, the officers decided to go deeper. The discovery of these documents had just opened the floodgates, and they realized they couldn't stop now. They had to find Keanu and confront him before anyone else did. But as they made their way back through the tunnel, something strange happened. The once clear path began to feel increasingly claustrophobic, the walls seeming to close in on them. And just as they reached the exit, they heard the faintest of noises, footsteps from behind them. Someone, or something, was following them. Were they being watched? And if so, by who? The tension was mounting to a breaking point. The deeper they dug, the more the investigation started to feel like a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The tension in the air was unbearable. The officers could hear the footsteps behind them growing louder, echoing through the narrow tunnel. Every instinct told them to turn around and face whoever or whatever was coming, but they pressed on, their minds racing with thoughts of what they had uncovered. Could Keanu himself have been involved in this? Was he part of the web of secrets they were beginning to untangle, or was he too a victim? As they reached the end of the tunnel, a door that had previously been hidden behind a false wall stood before them. The officers hesitated. The room they had discovered earlier was unsettling enough, but this felt different. Something in their gut told them that beyond this door lay the answer to everything. The truth about Keanu, his father, and the secrets that had been buried for so long. With a deep breath, they opened it. What lay inside was not what they expected. The room was stark, almost sterile, with nothing but a single table in the center. And on that table lay a collection of photographs, each one depicting Keanu. Only this time he wasn't alone. The images showed Keanu in various stages of his life, but the people around him were different. Some faces were familiar: his mother, his friends, even a few co-stars, but there were others too, faces he'd never been seen with in public, and one man in particular stood out. The man in the photographs was none other than Thomas Reeves, Keanu's estranged father. But as the officers looked closer, they noticed something else. The photos were dated. Some were taken years ago, others more recently, and in each of them Keanu appeared different. His eyes were colder, more distant. His smile, though always kind, never quite reached his eyes. It was as if the Keanu Reeves everyone knew, the kind-hearted, humble actor, was hiding behind a mask, and the real Keanu, the one in these photos, was someone else entirely. As the officers pored over the photos, they noticed a disturbing pattern. Many of the images were taken in locations they had seen mentioned in the documents they found in the tunnel, places tied to secret operations, covert meetings, and shadowy organizations. The pieces of the puzzle were coming together, but they didn't make sense. Was Keanu involved in these operations, or was he being manipulated, caught in something far beyond his control? Just as the officers were about to gather the photos and head out, a voice from the darkness stopped them in their tracks. "You're not supposed to be here." The voice was calm, measured, yet full of authority. It was a voice the officers didn't recognize. But they knew immediately that it wasn't Keanu's. Someone else had been watching them all along. From the shadows emerged a tall figure, dressed in black. His face was obscured by the dim lighting, but the officers could feel the danger emanating from him. He didn't need to speak to make his intentions clear. He was part of it, part of the very network that had been pulling strings behind the scenes, and now, it seemed, he was here to make sure the truth remained buried. The officers froze, the weight of the situation crashing down on them. They had stumbled too far into something they were never meant to understand. The room felt suffocating, the walls closing in on them as they realized the magnitude of what they had uncovered. Was Keanu a victim in all of this, or was he complicit? And if he wasn't the mastermind behind this operation, who was? The stakes were higher than ever before, and the officers knew they were now in a race against time to uncover the truth before it was silenced forever. The mysterious figure took a step forward, his voice low and dangerous. "Leave now," he warned, "or you'll never leave at all." The officers hesitated, but their resolve was stronger than the fear that gripped them. They had come too far to turn back now. They had to find Keanu. They had to understand what had happened. And they had to do it before the darkness swallowed them whole. The discovery of the tunnel had only just begun to peel back the layers of a mystery that stretched far beyond anything they could have imagined. And now, with the truth within their grasp, they faced a choice: confront the unknown and risk everything, or walk away and let the secrets remain buried. But they couldn't walk away now. They wouldn't. And that decision, that moment of bravery, would lead them into a world they could never have prepared for. The officers stood frozen, the weight of the mysterious figure's words hanging heavy in the air. Every instinct told them to retreat, to leave the hidden chamber and forget what they'd uncovered. But they couldn't. Not now. Not when the pieces of a story far bigger than anything they had imagined were within their grasp. The figure, cloaked in shadows, took another step forward. The silence in the room felt suffocating, as if the walls themselves were closing in on them. But before anyone could respond, a sound from behind them broke the tension, a voice they all recognized. "Is everything all right here?" The officers spun around to find Keanu standing in the doorway, his expression calm, but his eyes betrayed a deep, unmistakable weariness. He had been watching them all along. It was as if time slowed down. The officers' hearts raced, and the man who had once been an enigma, someone they'd only seen on the big screen, the mysterious and kind-hearted Keanu Reeves, was now standing before them, not as a star but as something far more complicated. He had a choice to make. The officers could see it in his eyes. He knew exactly what they had found and what it meant. The hidden tunnel, the photographs, the documents, it was all part of a web that had been spun around him long before he ever set foot in Hollywood. Keanu stepped into the room, his presence suddenly heavier than before, and the officer in charge hesitated before speaking. "Keanu, we didn't mean to—" "I know," he interrupted, his voice calm but tinged with sadness. "But you're too far into this now. You've seen too much." The tension in the room was unbearable. Keanu was no longer the person they thought. They knew. There was a coldness about him now, a resigned weight to his words, and in that moment the officers understood. Keanu had been carrying this burden for a long time. He wasn't just an actor. He was someone caught in the middle of a much darker story, a story tied to his father, to his family's past, and to forces far beyond his control. Keanu's father, Thomas Reeves, had been involved in a covert organization, one that spanned decades. He wasn't just a shadowy figure from Keanu's childhood. Thomas had been part of a network that dealt with things far more dangerous than anyone could imagine. Illegal operations, secret dealings, and an underground system of power that had kept Keanu under its thumb for most of his life. Keanu hadn't been completely complicit in his father's work, but he hadn't been able to escape it either. For years he had buried the truth deep within the walls of his villa, hoping that if he ignored it long enough, it would simply go away. But it hadn't. And now the police were standing in the middle of the very secrets he had tried to keep hidden. "I never wanted any of this," Keanu continued, his voice quieter now. "My father pulled me into his world when I was too young to understand, and when he left, I tried to build a life away from it all, but the past doesn't let go so easily. It's always been there underneath the surface. The officers stood in silence, processing the magnitude of what Keanu was saying. This wasn't just a story of a celebrity with a hidden past. It was a story of manipulation, of being trapped by family ties, and of trying to escape a life that had been forced upon him. Keanu's journey had been filled with more than just Hollywood fame. It had been a battle to reconcile his public persona with the dark legacy of his family. Keanu looked at the officers, his gaze unwavering. You've come this far, and now you have a choice. You can expose everything, the tunnel, the documents, the connections, but you have to understand, if you do that, it'll drag you into a world you don't want to be a part of. My father's associates, they'll stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The officers exchanged glances. They had already crossed a line. There was no turning back now. But the question still lingered. What would exposing this dark truth cost them? Keanu's expression softened for a brief moment, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. I don't want to keep running anymore, but I don't know if I can face this alone. He met their eyes. Will you help me? In that instant, the officers understood the gravity of what Keanu was asking. They weren't just uncovering a hidden past. They were being asked to help a man break free from it. The truth was no longer just a story for the public to consume. It was a journey of redemption and self-liberation. Keanu was ready to face his past, and the officers knew they had to be there with him. But they also realized that the world wasn't ready for what they were about to reveal. The tunnel was just the beginning. The story behind it would change everything. And Keanu, no matter how much he tried to escape, would never be free from his past until the truth was laid bare. As they left the hidden room and ascended the stairs back into the villa, the officers could feel the weight of the decision they had just made. They weren't just investigating a crime anymore. They were embarking on a mission to help someone reclaim their life from the shadows. The question remained, would the truth be enough to set Keanu free, or would the forces behind the tunnel drag him back into the darkness? The sun was setting, casting long shadows over Keanu's villa as the officers followed him out of the hidden chambers. The weight of what they had just learned was heavy, but they knew they couldn't walk away. Keanu had made his choice, and now they had to decide whether to stand by him or back off before they were caught up in something much bigger than they could handle. Keanu led them into the main living room, his face now hardening into a mask of determination. The once easygoing actor was gone, replaced by a man who had been shaped by years of secrets and lies. His eyes met theirs, and there was no mistaking the gravity in his voice when he spoke. I know what you're thinking. You're wondering if it's worth it, if helping me is worth the trouble. But the truth is, it's bigger than me now. My father's organization didn't just vanish when he died. They're still out there, and they'll do anything to protect. What's buried beneath this villa? What you've seen in those documents, it's just the beginning. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had already crossed a line by stepping into Keanu's world, but now they had to make a choice. Stay involved and risk everything, or walk away and pretend they never saw any of it. They knew that exposing the truth could destroy more than just Keanu's life. It could unravel a dark network that had been operating in the shadows for decades. Keanu continued pacing back and forth as he spoke, the urgency in his tone unmistakable. The people behind this, my father's associates, they're still watching. They won't stop until they find out who's been poking around in their affairs. And if I'm not careful, they'll come after me, after all of us. His words hit hard, each one a reminder of the danger they were all in. The tunnel, the documents, the hidden room, everything was part of a larger, far-reaching conspiracy. And it wasn't just about Keanu anymore. It was about the people who were still pulling the strings, the ones who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The officers were silent, each one grappling with the decision before them. It would have been easier to walk away, to ignore the truth and let Keanu handle his own problems. But they couldn't. Not after everything they had seen, not after everything they had learned. One of the officers, a young detective named Rachel, finally spoke up. We're in this now. We've seen too much to turn back, but we need to be careful. If we're going to take this on, we have to go all the way. No half measures. Keanu nodded, his expression grim but resolute. I know, and I'm ready. I've spent years running from my past, from my father's legacy, but I can't do it alone anymore. The tension in the room was palpable, but there was also a sense of solidarity, a shared understanding that they were all in this together now. Keanu had been hiding from his past for so long, but now that the truth was out, there was no turning back. Rachel looked at the others. We need to bring this to the authorities, but we have to be strategic. We can't just go to the media or announce it to the world. The people we're dealing with, they won't hesitate to silence anyone who threatens their operation. The officers all nodded in agreement. They knew what they had to do. They couldn't just expose the truth. They had to be methodical, careful. They would need allies, resources, and a plan to take down the network from the inside. It wouldn't be easy, but they were ready. They owed it to Keanu, and they owed it to themselves. Keanu looked at them, his eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and determination. I don't know what's going to happen next, but whatever it is, I'm ready to face it with all of you. And in that moment, the officers understood. This wasn't just about solving a crime or exposing a scandal. It was about helping someone reclaim their life and confronting the darkness that had been hidden for so long. The road ahead was uncertain, and the risks were high. But one thing was clear. They were in this together, and they would do whatever it took to bring the truth to light. As Keanu led them out of the villa and into the fading light of the evening, the officers couldn't help but wonder, how much farther would this journey take them? And would they be able to uncover everything, or would they be swept away by the same darkness they were trying to expose? The story was far from over, and the next chapter was just beginning. The next few days were a whirlwind. The officers now, fully committed to helping Keanu, worked tirelessly to gather information, reach out to their trusted allies, and put a plan in motion. But the stakes had grown higher than they ever could have imagined. Keanu's past was a tangled web of lies and secrecy, and the more they uncovered, the more they realized just how deep the conspiracy ran. Keanu had been right all along. There were people watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. The villa had been bugged, and every move they made was being monitored. The feeling of being trapped was inescapable. Every phone call felt like it could be intercepted. Every meeting seemed like it could be a setup. But there was no turning back now. The officers, along with Keanu, had come too far. Rachel, the young detective who had become their de facto leader in this investigation, paced back and forth in the dimly lit room. The walls felt like they were closing in as the reality of their situation began to set in. We don't have much time, Rachel said, her voice tense. We need to move fast. We have the evidence we need, but we can't take it to the authorities without exposing ourselves. They'll know who's behind this and the people we're up against. They won't hesitate to take us down. Keanu stood beside her, his face a mixture of resolve and fear. We need to find their weakness. If we can find the people at the top, the ones who are pulling the strings, we can stop this. We can bring the entire operation down. It was a risky plan, one that could easily backfire. But Rachel knew there was no other option. The organization they were up against had too much power, too many resources. But it was also vulnerable. Every organization had its cracks, and if they could find those cracks, they could exploit them. The officers had identified one key figure in the network, a mysterious businessman named Victor Price. No one knew much about him, but he seemed to be the one orchestrating everything behind the scenes. He had connections with Thomas Reeves, and it was clear that his influence stretched far beyond anything they had initially believed. But the more they dug into Victor's past, the more they realized just how dangerous he was. Rachel turned to the group. We need to get to Victor Price. He's the key. If we can take him down, we can dismantle everything. Keanu's eyes darkened. I know where he is. I've met him before. He was my father's closest ally. But he's ruthless. He'll do anything to protect himself. The officers were silent, each of them processing the gravity of the situation. They were about to go after a man who was entrenched in an underground world of power and violence, a man with far more resources than they could ever hope to have. But they didn't have a choice. Let's do it, Rachel said, determination in her voice. We move fast, we move smart, and we don't stop until we have him. The next few hours were a blur of activity. The officers secured their positions, gathering all the evidence they had uncovered so far. Keanu made contact with a few trusted allies, people who could provide crucial intel on Victor's whereabouts. And then, with everything in place, they set their plan into motion. They arrived at an upscale warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place Victor Price used as his base of operations. The building was heavily guarded, but the officers had done their homework. They knew the layout, the guards' shifts, and the security systems. It was risky, but if they could get inside without being detected, they would have their chance. The tension was thick in the air as the officers, led by Rachel and Keanu, crept through the shadows toward the warehouse. Every step felt like a ticking clock. The stakes were higher than ever before. Inside the warehouse, Victor Price was meeting with a few key members of his organization, but they didn't know that the officers were right outside, preparing to make their move. Rachel motioned to the team. "We go in on my mark. Stay silent. We can't afford to be caught." The officers nodded, their eyes focused, their hearts pounding in their chests, and then it happened. Rachel gave the signal. They moved quickly, slipping through the back entrance, taking out the few guards that stood in their way. It was a carefully coordinated operation. Everything was going according to plan. But as they entered the main room, they froze. Victor Price was standing in front of them, a cold smile on his face. His eyes flicked to Keanu, who stood at the front of the group, his posture tense but unwavering. "I knew you would come," Victor said, his voice smooth, almost mocking. "But you're too late. You've already lost." Rachel's heart raced. The situation had just become much more complicated. How had he known they would be here? The answer came too quickly. Behind them, the doors slammed shut with a deafening crash. Dozens of armed men flooded into the room, surrounding them on all sides. The trap had been set. "You've underestimated me," Victor continued, his smile widening. "Now you're going to pay the price." In that moment, the officers realized just how far they had pushed their luck. They were trapped, caught, in the heart of the very darkness they had been trying to expose. But there was no going back now. The final showdown had begun. The room pulsed with tension as Victor Price's men closed in, weapons raised, eyes sharp. The officers were outnumbered, and the realization hit them hard. Their plan had backfired. It was a trap, and they had walked straight into it. Keanu stood at the front, his face a mask of determination and regret. He had always known that this day would come, but the reality of it hit harder than he had ever imagined. He had hoped, no, he had prayed that his past wouldn't catch up to him. But here he was standing in the heart of the storm. Victor Price, cool and collected, stepped forward, his voice dripping with amusement. "You thought you could take me down," Victor said, surveying the group like a lion eyeing his prey. "But you're just pawns in a much bigger game. You've already dug too deep. There's no turning back now." Rachel, the young detective, didn't flinch. She knew they were trapped, but she wasn't about to give up without a fight. The officers stood their ground, backs to one another, scanning the room, looking for any opening, any chance to turn the tide. "Keanu," Rachel whispered urgently, "do you have any idea how we can get out of this?" Keanu glanced around, his mind racing. He had seen Victor in action before. This man was ruthless, and his grip on the underground network was ironclad. But there was something about him, something that Keanu had learned over the years. Victor had a weakness. "You have to get him to trust you," Keanu said softly, his voice filled with quiet intensity. "He won't kill me easily. I'm still valuable to him. He'll try to use me, but that's our chance. I need you to stay calm. And when the moment comes, we strike." Rachel nodded, understanding what Keanu was suggesting. This wasn't just about arresting Victor. It was about staying alive long enough to make it out and bring him to justice. Victor's cold smile never faltered as he stepped even closer, his eyes narrowing in on Keanu. "You think you can still outsmart me, don't you? You're nothing but a shadow of your father. Just like him, weak, always running, always hiding, but no more." Keanu stood firm, despite the sting of his words. He had been running from his father's legacy for far too long, but now it was time to confront it. The standoff seemed to stretch for an eternity, Victor's men were poised to strike at any moment, and the officers were calculating their every move, knowing that one wrong step could mean their end. Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance. It was faint but unmistakable. The sound was enough to make Victor's eyes flicker with a momentary flash of concern. "What is that?" Victor growled, his grip tightening on his gun. "It's the cavalry," Rachel replied, her voice steady. She had a plan. The officers had called for backup before entering the warehouse, and it was coming. It was their only shot, but she knew they had to buy time. Victor's face twisted with rage. "You think you can win this? You're out of time." In a flash, he ordered his men to fire, but just as the first shot rang out, Keanu moved, lunging toward Victor with a force that surprised everyone. The two grappled, the gunfire ringing around them, the officers diving for cover. Rachel reacted instinctively, pulling her own weapon and returning fire, covering her team as they made a break for the exit. The room became chaos, gunshots echoing. Off the walls, the sound of footsteps pounding as they rushed to fight their way out. Keanu and Victor struggled in the center, their fight a blur of movement. Keanu, despite being outmatched, had one thing on his side: sheer will. His life had been nothing but a struggle against the forces that sought to control him, and now, in this moment, he fought with everything he had to survive. As they fought, Keanu managed to get the upper hand, knocking Victor's gun from his hand. With a swift movement, he pinned Victor against the ground, his voice low but filled with authority. "You're done," Keanu said, his breath heavy. "This is over." Victor glared up at him, a snarl on his lips. "You'll never get away with this, Reeves. You'll never escape your father's legacy." Keanu's eyes hardened. "I'm not running anymore." Just as Victor's men were about to make a move, the backup arrived. The sound of police reinforcements filled the air, their sirens blaring as they stormed the warehouse, overpowering Victor's remaining guards. The officers who had been working with Rachel took control of the situation, arresting Victor and his men before they could mount a resistance. Keanu stood, breathing heavily, as Rachel approached him, her eyes scanning. The room, it was over. The man who had been the puppet master behind so much of the chaos was finally in custody. But the battle wasn't quite won. They still had to untangle the network of corruption that had been operating for so long. Keanu turned to Rachel. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you, without all of you." Rachel smiled, though it was bittersweet. "We all have our demons, but we also have the power to face them, together." As Victor was led away in handcuffs, Keanu looked around at the officers who had stood by him, the ones who had chosen to risk everything to bring the truth to light. They had fought not just for justice but for redemption. The journey had been long, and the cost had been high. But in the end, Keanu had taken the first step in reclaiming his life, his past, and his future. The truth had finally come to light, and though it had been a long and hard road, it was a road that had led to freedom. As the night settled around the warehouse and the sirens faded into the distance, Keanu took a deep breath. The darkness had been exposed, but the light was just beginning to break through. The question now was, what would he do with his second chance? And as for the officers, they knew they had just taken down something much larger than they ever anticipated. But they also knew they had made a difference. In this fight they had won. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from.